Intellectual property rights create a great deal of controversy in video game publishing, or in pretty much any media industry for that matter. Patents, copyrights, trademarks, and the like are the key to incentivizing a creation. It seems pretty simple on the surface. If you create something, you should be able to sell it. But the legal arguments surrounding ownership are vast and complicated, even delving into philosophical and theoretical justifications of morality. Natural rights advocates argue the Lockean theory that our natural rights include ownership of our labor and the fruits of said labor. So, according to those theorists, intellectual property ownership is as American as the Declaration of Independence itself. To argue against intellectual property ownership would be to argue against the Enlightenment and the core beliefs that created democracy and liberty. Another camp are the utilitarians, a group of pragmatists who put protection of private property at the forefront of their agenda. They believe that protecting private property is at the root of a prosperous society. A lot of the utilitarian ideas are born out of the rapid economic growth that Europe and then Germany and Japan experienced during the Industrial Revolution. Inventions like the steam engine, spinning jenny, power loom, cotton gin, and myriad others were instrumental in industrial development, and each of the inventions had a patent filed by the owner. If you're American, you've probably heard of people like James Watt or Eli Whitney because they invented some of those things. They were also patent owners. In short, utilitarians believe that IP ownership is a must because it encourages people to innovate and thereby advance as a society. The last theoretical basis for intellectual property is based on Hegel's ideas of idealism. The argument is that creating an object or bringing an idea to life is an extension of one's self. What you create is a part of who you are. They also believe that people are naturally apt to steal, and one must protect their creations or risk losing them. There's a lot more to say about the theory of intellectual property and about property ownership in general. It's a debate that has defined the creation of politics and government for millennia. One particular historian I was fortunate enough to study under traced the development of copyright in retaliation to music piracy throughout the 20th century, delving into the ownership of pieces created on a phonograph all the way up to Napster during the 1990s. That alone took years of research and writing to produce. The point is, intellectual property rights are very, very important. That is true for the video game industry as well. That's why today we are looking at a recent issue at the National Film and Television School and how certain schools are trying to take ownership of their students' work. This discussion is drawn primarily from an article published by Tim Davies for Games Industry, link in the description below. So what had happened was, NFTS has been asking students that wanted to finish the games they worked on while they were enrolled at the school to pay the school £1,200 per game to buy back the intellectual property for the work they produced. So, if you're a student at NFTS and you try to finish and sell a game that you worked on while you were in school, the school would make you pay them a lump sum. If you choose not to pay that buyout fee, your other option is to pay the school 7.5% of all revenue generated by your game indefinitely. Many students disagree with the institution trying to take a cut of the sales, and they've argued that the yearly tuition of £14,800 for the MA program is plenty of profit for the school already. For students outside of the EU, that tuition is nearly doubled. The question is, can the National Film and Television School claim ownership of all intellectual property rights in their students' work? One big problem is that students aren't always aware of the legal steps they should take whenever they enter into a deal with investors or publishers. It's important that devs make it clear in their agreements that they own the game and all intellectual property rights therein. Publishers and investors can be quite tricky, and young devs don't always make it clear in their agreements. If a developer doesn't clearly state in writing that he or she owns the IP, the publisher takes advantage. This is increasingly problematic because if the dev leaves the door open for any uncertainty of ownership, the publisher or investor is much more prepared for a lawsuit because they're the ones who already have the money. IP waters are tough to navigate, and the agreements are almost always set up in the publisher's favor. Students at NFTS are taught how to make games, but they aren't always taught how to protect themselves legally. How can students even be sure that they own the IP rights to their games? Well, let's take a look at how the UK handles these rules of ownership. Filing a trademark is a great way to ensure that you own the IP for your game, but trademarks are also territorial in the UK, so you would need to register your trademark in multiple areas throughout the kingdom. It gets even more cloudy with an exception to ownership during employment. Legally, the author is the owner of the copyright, so the person who created the work is the first owner of copyright of the work. The problem in this case is, the exception to the rule is that copyright in any works created during the course of an individual's employment will be owned by that individual's employer, unless there is a written agreement to the contrary allowing the employee to keep the copyright. It's also possible for IP rights to be passed around intermittently because devs are oftentimes contract workers, so whoever commissions them can take temporary ownership of the works they're producing. Let's say I'm a young developer who needs funding, so I reach out to a moderately large publisher for financial backing. They would likely put a provision in my contract saying that anything I work on while they're paying me will be their intellectual property. There isn't much I could do about it because I would need the money and I couldn't pursue my goals without the investors. Couple that with the fact that devs aren't normally educated on how to navigate the legality of copyright ownership, and you've got a situation where the publishers clearly have a house advantage. Legally, NFTS can undoubtedly own the IP rights of their students' work. The way they're doing this is by having their students sign their terms and conditions, which includes their IP policy. Paragraph 2 states that as part of any course you undertake at the NFTS, any materials created or contributed by you as part of that course, in any form, including written or artistic works, film, video or sound recordings, musical compositions, set designs, and other audio or audiovisual works, will be regarded as course works. These course works are likely to be protected by intellectual property rights, such as copyright and design right. Paragraph 3. In consideration of the NFTS offering you a place on a course at the NFTS and you accepting a place on that course, the NFTS requires you to assign, i.e. transfer, to the NFTS all intellectual property rights in the course works. Paragraph 4. Accordingly, you hereby assign to the NFTS with full title guarantee, and by way of assignment of present and future copyright, all such right and title as you own in the intellectual property rights and exploitation rights which do or will protect or subsist in such courseworks worldwide in all media, in perpetuity, the assigned rights, without the need for any further payments to be made to you. This means that NFTS shall be the sole owner of the assigned rights in the courseworks, with the right to make use of the courseworks and the assigned rights as it sees fit. What NFTS does here is make students sign away ownership of the projects they work on while they are enrolled. I'm willing to bet that the majority of students don't even read these terms and conditions when they enroll, and they only realize later that they've entered into a legally binding agreement to forfeit ownership of their IP to the school. This one piece of the terms and conditions is buried in pages of documents to read and sign. As the old adage goes, the devil is in the details. You also have to consider that the students are left with very little alternative. If they are serious about pursuing a master's degree and taking the next step in their careers, they have to sign that paper, or give up on furthering their education entirely. In a society that increasingly values graduate degrees, students' backs are pinned to the wall in this scenario. Thankfully, not all institutions follow NFTS's policies. Many schools allow students to take full ownership unless they received funding for their work through the school itself. That's where the issue becomes even cloudier. NFTS has provided the student in this particular case study with £1,000 to market and fund the development of their game. It gives them an even stronger leg to stand on because not only did the student sign an agreement, but they've also taken school funds to help with their game. £1,000 is only 1/14 of 1 year's tuition though, so I still wouldn't say it makes NFTS's policy fair to the student. As is normally the case when I conduct these types of case studies, I've found that what the school is doing isn't illegal. Just like Fortnite's stance on stealing people's dances isn't technically illegal. That doesn't mean that we can't pass moral judgment though. Imagine you've poured months of work into a game you've made while at school. You use the game to prove that you've satisfied the requirements for conferment of your degree, but you certainly wouldn't want to just leave it behind. You've dumped blood, sweat, and tears years into your work, so you'd likely want to continue perfecting the game and use it to achieve your end goal, to develop and sell your art. Now imagine that you were told that you have to pay £1,200 or give the school 7.5% of all the money that you earn forever. Personally, I'd be pissed off. What NFTS is doing, while legal, is kind of scummy, especially when considering that other universities are offering students full ownership as long as they don't take money from the school or through the school to fund development. There isn't much that NFTS students can do right now, but this case study can serve as a lesson to future game development students. They should take initiative before they enroll. Read the fine print, be prepared to understand the legality of the binding agreement you enter into as a student, and always protect yourself. It starts at the beginning, so don't find yourself 90% through your program of study before you make yourself aware of the contract you sign. If we get back into the philosophical groundings for these arguments, we should return to John Locke, perhaps the most important figure of the Enlightenment. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. NFTS strips away private property in their fine print. A disgusting act indeed. But what do you think? Is it okay for NFTS to take a cut of the proceeds? Again, it's perfectly legal, but do you agree with it morally? Let me know what you think. I know many of our viewers are aspiring developers themselves, so I'd love to hear some insight from personal experiences. Also, be sure to check out Tim Davies' article about NFTS and feel free to read the terms and conditions for yourself in the description below. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video on intellectual property in video games. If you did, be sure to share it on Reddit or any place where people might find it interesting. Shares are the only way we can continue to grow here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys on the next one.